Garland Nixon here, and I'm going to make an argument that World War III is already going on, that it's been going on for a while, that it's just taking a different form this time, but Europe's going to end up screwed anyway. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and yeah, I mean that is a kind of, I guess, in a way, a frightening thing to talk about, World War III. But what does it mean? What form is it taking? We think about World War III, we think about the First World Wars, and we think about a time when there was just brutal and blunt force, right? Where they were just, men, and there were hot metal flying around and people getting blown up in trench warfare, and then the Second World War, and there was even more mechanized ways to kill lots of people, air forces, and it was a mess. So now World War III, I would argue, I'm going to make the argument that World War III is ongoing, that it has a different form now, that people are much more reticent, superpowers, to get involved in a shooting war because of nuclear weapons, and we all know how it ends. And their backers are the supporters of the people in power. If you think Joe Biden's in power, you don't understand how power works. The people who are running the U.S. empire, the people who are the vassals, who are the leaders of the European colonies, they all have backers. They all have people who are writing the checks to keep them in power. And those people are very happy. I put it like this. Think about the whole transhumanism stuff, right? We're talking about people who are rich. And what do they want to do? If they had their way, they would like transfer their consciousness into a computer so that they could continue to live forever and enjoy the fruits of their wealth and blah, blah, blah. So these people don't want a nuclear war. So I would argue a nuclear war is possible, but highly unlikely. For this reason, the people that are in so-called in charge, that appear to be in charge, that have the illusion of power, work for people who love being powerful and being rich so much they don't want to screw that up with a nuclear weapon. So that's a good thing, if there's anything good to be pulled of this. But let's talk about, why would the U.S. want World War II? Because this is about three, because the U.S. empire is about that. A couple of things. This is an obvious one, an easy one. The U.S. empire really grew after World War II, and it was a very simple reason. After World War II, it's industrial uh, um, uh, um, and powerful adversaries, enemies, even allies that could be industrial and economic challengers, threats, whatever the case, whatever you want to say, were all bombed flat. Germany, Japan, the Axis powers, they were bombed flat. Its allies was bombed flat. Pretty much everybody was bombed flat, except maybe some of the developing world, as we call it. They called it third world. So in reality, because of the U.S. was, as they say, it was um, a country with insignificant powers to the north and south, and and fish to the east and west. Um, it was so far away, it was just too far to bomb. So they couldn't come bomb us flat. Everybody else got bombed flat but us. So as a result, and now add that with something else. Due to the war, the U.S. built up its economic might. So it was an economic and industrial might. So it was an economic and industrial power. Everybody else was bombed flat. Boom, the U.S. had all of the advantages. And boom, what do you know? The U.S. becomes the big superpower. Now, the Soviet Union built back up pretty quickly and became a superpower to challenge it. But those were the two big powers. But the Soviet Union was more kind of a hermit kingdom. So it was about um, making sure that they did everything internally. It wasn't as much, and the U.S., as much as they could, tried to do everything they could to thwart any economic growth and any economic outreach by the Soviet Union. So they were held back somewhat. But bottom line is the U.S. became powerful. Why? Because Japan, Germany, all of Europe were flattened. They were rendered economically, industrially impotent, right? So from the perspective of the US, you got to look back to those times and say that worked out quite well for us, don't you? Worked out real well for us, for the money. They made money and power and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So my point being this, the US has to look at Europe and say, I'd like to recreate that. It obviously is. The US looks and says, I'd like to recreate that. I'd like to create a world where my adversaries, where my industrial and economic challengers, right, are all rendered impotent and I'm the only one left standing. Therefore, I make the money. How do I do that, right? We got three big challengers. Now, India is, in the waiting, in the batter's box, waiting to try to become a giant power. And might I add, India is smart enough to look at it and say Russia and China are becoming powerful countries. They're becoming world powers. The U.S. automatically puts a crosshairs on them and says, I got to take them out. The reason that India is supporting Russia is because they know that they aspire to be a world power. And if they aspire to be a world power, they know that the U.S. is going to do the same thing to them that it's doing to China and Russia today. So India is sticking with Russia because they don't have a choice, because they already know we aspire to be a world power. We just passed, India just passed, the UK is like the fifth largest economy in the world, but keep in mind it's a fraud with the UK. It's all London money, fake derivative bullshit. So the reality is it's not like the UK people were actually getting anything off of those numbers. They're fake numbers, derivatives and asset-backed securities and things of that nature, and stolen money. So the US looks at this and says, how can I recreate the outcome of World War II without having the kinetic interaction? Because the US looks at it and says, we stand to lose. We now have other countries with nukes. If we go to war with China, China's got 300-400 nukes. They can do us really serious damage. I mean, they can end the United States as it is. If they hit if they fire all the major nukes at the US, 300-400 nukes, it may end the world. But first and foremost, you hit 300-400 cities in the US with nukes, there ain't no US anymore. Your cities are flattened and your country is just littered with, even if the world survives, your country is littered with nuclear fallout. It's over. Game, set, and match. All the people that were trying to do this stuff are all dead. They already know that. So they go to war with China. That happens. Next, if they go to war with Russia, Russia has some serious firepower when it comes to nukes. So they go to war with Russia, and Russia can end it all in minutes, right? So they bluff a lot, but they don't. Here's what the thing is: everybody thinks the U.S. wants a war with China. I don't think they really want a war with China. I know they don't really want a war with Russia. They don't want that. The model that you're seeing in Europe, in Eastern Europe, is the model that these devious plotsters want to use. They don't want to go to war because they know how that ends and they don't want to die. What they want to do is come up with a way. Remember the outcome. You want all of your adversaries and all of your industrial and economic challengers to go down, and you're the only one left standing. How do you do that? Let's start with Europe. At the end of World War II, what was Europe? It was a pile of rubble. You want the same thing at the end of World War III, right? And I say I'm going to argue that World War III is ongoing. You want the same thing. You want Europe to end up being a pile of rubble. Why? It benefited the U.S. The U.S. made a lot of money the last time Europe was about a pile of rubble. And the U.S. then said, we've got the Marshall Plan. We're going to rebuild Europe, and we're going to have put bases in there to protect Europe. But that wasn't to protect Europe. It was the opposite of protecting Europe. Europe is occupied land. So they put bases in Europe and they said, okay, we're here to protect you, but you better do every damn thing we said. And in fact, let's not forget, 1947, I believe it was, the first CIA act, major act, was to put $47 million, I believe, at the time, which was, imagine how much that was in the 40s, in Greece, to basically ensure there was a left-leaning government, a socialist government, I believe, to make sure that the socialists didn't win. So one of the first big things that the CIA did was made sure there was no democracy in Europe, that the Europeans don't get to choose their government. That was one of the first things. So they've got bases there, and now they got the CIA saying you don't get to choose your government. And so the only thing they needed to do after that was to continue the illusion, make sure the people in Europe thought they had democracy, and ensure that the leaders knew they had to answer to Washington and there was no democracy. But now they look, and what happens? Europe starts to get froggy. Europe starts to be like, look, we want to, remember France, Macron, we want a European army. Oh, no, then you don't need the US army. And the US starts to feel like you're a threat. They're talking about we need to make our own decisions. Remember this? The US left Afghanistan, and Europe's like, we should have stayed there. We need our own army so we can stay there when the US tells us to leave, and blah, 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 right? They're getting froggy. The US empire is looking at it saying, this is a problem. This is going to grow. They are another problem for us. So the US says, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll wipe out the EU. And while we're at it, we'll cause so much damage to Russia and China that all of those entities are economically crushed. So the game plan is this. Number one, don't forget the Rand report of 2019, where they specifically enumerated what they're doing right now with Ukraine. They talked about in that Rand report what they were going to do, right? And the fact that they knew they were going to use Ukraine to go after Russia. They knew there could be a military response. They knew that it could be very damaging to Ukraine, and that, things of that nature. The Russians may take part of Ukraine. They knew all of that. All of this was known and planned, game planned. Just read the 2019 Rand report. I can put it up if you want. I should put it in the afterwards. I'll put it in the what do you call it? The show notes. But at any rate, so it was, here's what we do. And in the end of this, any way you look at, because they looked at Europe, and here's what they saw. Europe is getting froggy. Why? Because Europe's getting some money. Europe's getting powerful. Europe's getting economically powerful, right? And we look at it and we say, well, what's Europe doing? How are they becoming economically powerful? They're getting cheap energy from Russia. Now, let's go back to something that Donald Trump said, because people seem to think Donald Trump is some kind of a, guy who's fighting the system, really. Yeah. Donald Trump said a while back, and this is discussion that's being had now. The problem is, here's the problem in Europe, that they were too dependent on Russian energy. That's the problem with Europe. They were a problem. And Trump comes out, I told them, I tried to tell everyone that they were too dependent on Russian energy. So now, the Europeans found a model that worked for them. The model is, we get cheap energy from a partner that can provide cheap energy and reliably cheap energy, continue to do it indefinitely, give us contracts for a good price, give us, instead of having to pay to have it shipped, LNG has to be converted into liquefied natural gas. I think they use liquid nitrogen to do that. Then it has to be put on a ship. Then it has to be taken wherever it's taken. Then it has to be converted back from liquid nitrogen gas, and they give it 13% oxygen, and all this crap has to happen, right? But if you got pipelines, you just push it through the pipeline. Once the pipeline's built, it's game over. You got nothing to do but maintain the pipeline, maintain your infrastructure. It's a lot cheaper, so you can get long-term contracts and cheap gas. Russia's happy. They can keep pumping gas and making money. You're happy. You have an industrial model that works. The U.S. said, well, that's a terrible model. We don't like that model. It makes you dependent on Russia. Now, why? Because Europe is looking at the model saying, how does that model work for me economically, right? Economically, it's a great model for Europe. I have industry. My industry's growing. I have a cheap way to maintain industry. Meanwhile, my people can live and they can have all the things they need and they can get their energy cheap. It's a great model. So from the perspective of what's in the best interest of their countries and their people and their industries, Europe is like, that's a great model. The US isn't looking at it like that. It's like, screw you. I don't care about that stuff. We care about being controlled. And it's a bad model for us being in control because we're trying to convince you that Russia's coming to get you. You got to spend 2% of your GDP to be in NATO, and we get to control everything. We get full control of your countries. If you guys have this economic model and it keeps growing, you're not going to give us control anymore. And you're going to decide you can defend yourself, and you're not going to spend 2% of your GDP buying our bullshit weapons. Okay, so the US looks at that, and while the EU sees it economically, this is a good economic model. The US sees it geopolitically and says it's not a good geopolitical model for us because we're trying to rule the world, we're trying to maintain power, and this will make you too independent. And now it's like, you guys see, we told you you shouldn't have got that cheap energy that worked great for your economic model. But think about this. When the US was saying that all along, you shouldn't be buying, you shouldn't be buying that cheap energy from Russia. If the Europeans had been listening to them all along, their economy wouldn't be where it is today. It wouldn't be where it is today. They would have never grown like it has, right? But they didn't. But now the US isn't giving them a choice anymore. The US is now saying, you will do what you're told. And of course, the EU leaders are like, sure, what the hell? We're going to be rich anyway. We don't care about the people. That's not what this thing is about. So ultimately, the US is looking, and they're going to get part of what they want, but not all of it. In the end, what do they want? They want, just like before, Germany was garbage, finished, trashed. China was trashed. Japan was trashed. Europe was trashed. Everybody was trashed. We were the power brokers. We owned everything. They want a unipolar world. They want to be in power. So they want that again. So the sanctions, while they say they're designed to take out Russia, they're designed to take out Russia and Europe. That was their plan. We can get Europe off of this cheap energy that benefits their industrial model, and Europe will fall apart. Now, this time, we don't want to do the bombing thing because it could go nuclear and we could die. So what we'll do is we'll do it economically, and you'll have the same thing. Europe will be a pile of garbage when we get finished with it. It will be in the same shape it is economically as it was back then. But we'll still have the infrastructure. So that works for us. Now, their plan was the same thing would happen to Russia, but they didn't realize something economically, because the US economy is built on magical asset-backed securities, derivatives, and bullshit. They thought, well, that's where the real money is. So when we do that, Russia's going to fall apart. Well, the problem is Russia's economy is built on gold and titanium and neon gas and oil and coal and all of these hard grain and food and all of these hard commodities. That doesn't work for them. There's always somebody that wants to buy the stuff that they have. It's like a weed salesman. They don't sell weed, they offer weed, and people want to buy weed, so they come to get them to buy weed. A weed salesman don't have to chase a lot of people around because there's lots of people that want to buy weed. That's the way Russia is with their commodities. They have something that everybody wants. It ain't hard. All they got to do is sit there. People will come to them. Hey, can we buy your commodities? Yeah, sure, whatever. It's not like Russia's now. What Russia is doing, I believe now, is looking east to Asia, saying we want to replace the amount of income we're getting, completely replace the amount of income we're getting from Europe, and we can cut them the hell off because the time is coming. The U.S. is going to get their wish with Europe. Europe is going to be economically in the condition that it was in after World War II, because the U.S. is saying, yeah, those Ruskies go with us, and the Europeans, the elite ruling class and the Europeans are guiding the rest of the country right off a cliff. I mean, the rest of the continent right off a cliff, which they're doing, which they know what the hell they're doing. So what's going to go down is this. The Europeans are going to stop taking Russian gas. Russia, of course, they're going to stop buying as much. They've already stopped buying as much, and they're threatening and stuff like that. And there's more sanctions, more sanctions. There'll always be more sanctions. If Putin wakes up tomorrow and yawns, they'll say, well, we got to do a ninth package of sanctions. If he wakes up the next day and doesn't yawn, they'll say we got to do a 10th package of sanctions. The sanctions aren't related to what Russia does. The sanctions are related. It's internally, this gleeful feeling, this constantly feeling. They do that so they can feel like they're punching Russia. It ain't doing nothing, but it's like, how can we punch Russia again? Let's find some Russian names and we'll just sanction a bunch of people. We don't even know who the hell they are. Some guy like a crossing guard in Moscow who's standing there crossing. There we go, sanction him. put his name on the sanctions list. They're doing it. They're like a bunch of high schoolers at a party playing dare. I dare you to go further. Oh, yeah, well, you watch this, I'll go further. You watch this, I'll go further. So while the Europeans are over there cutting their own throats, destroying their own economy, the U.S. is sitting over there buying more oil than ever from Russia, buying all this stuff, uranium, buying everything from Russia. Think about this. How stupid do you have to be? You're sitting over there, we're going to show Russia we're not buying anything from them. And the U.S. is like, good job, don't buy anything from them. Hello, Russia? Yeah, we want to buy lots of shit from you. Oh, plenty. Oh, don't worry about those idiots. Fuck them. Yeah, but send us more of everything. That's what the U.S. is doing. And the Europeans are like, yes, sir, they're on our side. All righty. We're standing with the U.S. against the Ruskies. The Ruskies are going to end up laughing at you, and the EU is going to be laughing at you, and you're going to need another Marshall Plan. And boy, are you really screwed, because when you need the neocons, they're going to take you to the cleaners. All right, so let's continue. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the U.S. trying to build a scenario, post-World War II apocalyptic scenario. So we start with the EU, and we see that it works with the EU. It works with the EU because they're able to convince the EU to commit economic suicide. Now, the first part is this, and that is that economically it's going to work with the EU because the people in the EU, the decisions that they're making are going to deindustrialize the EU. And industry is not something you build overnight. Industry is not something that you build it today and it falls apart and you rebuild it next week. It takes centuries to do that. It takes a long time to build up. Well, not centuries, but it takes a long time to build. And you've got to have a good plan. And it ain't going to work with neoliberalism. And EU is a neoliberal haven. So what they're doing will not bring them back from the abyss. Number one, their economic and social ideology is not going to bring them back from the abyss. So there ain't nowhere to get back to. There's no path. Once Europe goes to hell, here in the next 6 or 8 months, there ain't no path back from hell. I don't see a way out of it for this reason, because what the U.S. really convinced them to do is to expose their, what I would call a racially motivated hatred of Russians, right? So of course the Russians are going to be like, you bastards, we didn't know you hated us this bad. But once the Russians are able to get everything they need done, everything they need straight, and get their markets completely solidified in Asia and the rest of the world, so that they're good, so that they got their products sold, and it ain't going to be hard because they got the stuff that people need, right? Once they do that, I suspect the Russians are going to say to the Europeans, you don't need to sanction us anymore. You don't need to sanction us. You don't need to get off of our gas. You don't need to get off of evil Russian oil and titanium and all that. You don't need any more of that stuff. Those days are behind us. We're decoupling. Go on about your business. You don't need to blame us anymore and say the Russians are out to get us. No hard feelings. You don't need to say the Russians are trying to hurt us. They're trying to, no. Go on with your lives. Just pretend you don't even know us. We won't be going over there. You don't need to bar us from getting green cards or visas. We're not coming to visit you. We don't want to see you. We don't want to sell you anything. We don't want to do business with you. Go on about your business. And Europe will be in a position to say, we don't have a model to successfully reindustrialize. And they're going to look to the U.S., and the U.S. is going to treat them like it has treated the rest of these developing or third world countries. Sure, you'd like an IMF loan, would you? World Bank? Sure, certainly. You want an IMF or World Bank loan, something like that? We'd be happy to do that. Now, we're going to give you the money, but we got a few things we need you to do. Some of those social programs that you got for your people. Well, UK, you've got a national health services, don't you? Yeah. Oh, that's going to have to go. Oh, wait a minute, Germany, you've got free college for people, don't you? Yeah, well, we can lend you this money, but not for free college. Oh, Finland, Sweden, Norway. First of all, we're going to lend you this money, but 2% of your GDP must be spent on NATO. And, Finland and Denmark, all of these wonderful social programs you've got to help the poor, and rent controls, and all of these famous things that you have that people call, democratic socialism, whatever the hell they call it. Yeah, that shit's gone, done, out of here. So what they will do is turn the EU into banana republics without the bananas, impoverished, corrupt places. And I suspect that somewhere in that transition, I don't know where, but I suspect it's the part where people get cold and hungry. Some parts of Europe are actually going to get turned to physical rubble because there will be people who wake up and say, holy shit, I got no electricity. When is it coming back on? And the government says, we're doing some rolling blackouts right now, but we don't know how to unroll them. So right now, we were giving you 12 hours a day of electricity, but we're out of gas. So we don't even have 12 seconds a day of electricity. You're out of electricity. You're back to the Stone Ages. If you have some people you need to call or contact or communicate with, Neanderthals communicated with simple clicks and grunts. You might want to try that. If you got a stove, maybe some firewood, you can burn some furniture. If you got some old, I know it gets kind of chilly. Maybe you got a bunch of old Ukrainian flags that you've been flying out the windows. You might want to wrap up in those and try to keep warm. And yell Slava Ukraine, lots and lots and lots. Sometimes maybe that'll help. But other than that, your ass is grass. That's the future of Europe. They are, I suspect, as incompetent as the leaders of Europe are, I suspect they've already run models, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'm thinking because if I was in charge, I'd run some models to figure out, some computer models to figure out what was going to go bad, how much I had, how long or less. But think about it. These idiots have said, with as much trouble as they're in as far as gas is concerned, they've said when it comes to oil, December 15th, we're not taking any more Russian oil. I don't think they're going to have a problem with the Russians are going to have a problem with that. I think December 15th, the Russians will say, whatever, okay, we'll cut it off. Because they don't have, they did that. It's like this. It's like a person who says, I'm going to do something, it's like, I'm going to do something next Thursday, never really thinking about the fact that at some point next Thursday is going to come and they don't have a plan. And now it's Monday. Hey, dude, you said you were going to do that Thursday. They said they were going to fight a big guy. What are you going to do? Thursday after school, I'm going to fight Big Ralph. Ralph don't scare me. I'll fight him Thursday after school. And around Monday, they start thinking, Thursday's getting kind of close and I don't have a plan. How the hell am I going to get out this? Ralph's going to beat the shit out of me, and then Tuesday and Wednesday. And everybody says, wow, I guess Garland had a plan. He's got to have a plan to fight Big Ralph. Nobody would be stupid enough to set up a plan. To set up a time to fight Big Ralph without some kind of a plan. What's Garland going to do? Does he know karate? Is he going to sneak out of school? Or what's Garland's plan? And nobody thinks that I'd be stupid enough. Everybody knows Garland would never be stupid enough to schedule a fight with Big Ralph Thursday after school unless he had a plan. But little do they know, Garland is that stupid. I don't have a plan. And Thursday comes and I'm sitting there, oh God, what do I do now? I think that's the leaders of Europe. I think people are like, no, they couldn't possibly go into winter with not enough gas, being belligerent to the only person that could bail them, the only country that could bail them out. They're being completely belligerent towards that country, and they don't have enough gas to make it through the winter. They don't have enough fuel. They're going to have gas stations all over, the petrol stations, as they call them, where people will pull up and say, hey, I want some petrol. And they'll say, we don't have any. Oh, well, I can't, I want to sleep in my car. It's the only way I can. I know it's dangerous, but I got to run the heater because we have no electricity at home. Yeah, well, we got no electricity to pump these pumps of petrol, and which is fine because we don't have any petrol to pump anyway. That Europe's going to be like Neanderthal days. So what you got there is the U.S. will get their way. You now have a continent that has fallen apart that needs a Marshall Plan. And as I said, at that point, I don't think people that are that cold and that hungry are going to be very rational. I can't see that people in that position are going to want to be in a mood to chat. They're going to be in a mood. Hey, Olaf Schultz, it's middle of winter. We got no food. We got nothing. Let's have a talk. Let's have a reasonable discussion about, how we got to this and how we're going to get out of it. You think they're going to be like that? I don't think they are. I think there will be hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people in the street. Because let's face it, one might say they're not going to the streets because it's cold. They ain't going to have no heat at home. They got to go somewhere. It ain't going to be no, maybe they can get hundreds of thousands of people together. They can huddle together like puppies. Because one damn thing's for sure, being home ain't going to do no good. So at some point they go to the streets, but they don't go to the streets and say, hey, how do we fix this? That's not how people act in times of desperation. You see, you got a bunch of technocrats, a bunch of people who think they know everything, a bunch of people who think they're in charge and people have to do what they say. Annalena Baerbock, I will never forget, she will live to regret. Annalena Baerbock will live to regret saying, yeah, I don't care what the German voters say, we're going to continue to support Ukraine. She will live to regret that. That I will guarantee you. We will have that discussion again. We will have this discussion again on what she said. She will live to regret that. I don't think the people, when they are in desperation, you know, it's Maslow's pyramid. What is it? Maslow's pyramid of self-actualization, of needs and all that. And on the very bottom of the pyramid is what? Your basic safety, food, shelter, things of that nature. People got to have that. After that, they can have philosophical discussions and intellectual discussions. But if they ain't got food, if we're sitting here talking, you're sitting here watching, you know, some schmuck on YouTube run off at the mouth, right? That sounds good and fine. The door opens and a lion comes in. The door opens and in squirms a black mamba. You're going to forget about this because you are now down on the most basic level. You're now thinking about survival, and nobody better be in between you and that window, because you see it. Oh, look at that. What do you know? A king cobra just came through the door. You're going out the damn window. You're sliding that window up. I don't care. Screen and all. You're out the window. Why? Because, and you might get cut. You might get injured or whatever. But at that time, you got bigger fish to fry. You have gone into fight, flight, or freeze. Most people say fight or flight. It's actually fight, flight, or freeze. Some animals freeze. Some animals, boom, sit still, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. So that's where you are. You got bigger fish to fry, or in this case, king cobras, you're gone, right? Now, when you have an entire society, country, continent that is saying fight, flight, or freeze, and we're talking about freezing for real, they're now like, here's the thing. You're watching a YouTube show. You're rational. You're listening to what I got to say, figure it out if I have to make sense, if I'm making sense. You're rational. Yeah, let me get my coffee. Let me see, look at this friggin' idiot and see what he has to say. God, I hate his guts, but he's making sense every now and then. Okay. But you can't watch Garland if you don't have electricity. And if you're sitting there and you have enough electricity to watch it, but you're like this, you're seeing your breath. Can you imagine that? You're in your own house seeing your breath. You got no water because your pipes are frozen and busted. You got no sewage. You got rolling electricity, 3 hours on, 3 hours off, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, and then it's off and ain't no back on. How do you do that? At that point, as we say in America, Katie, bar the door. At that point, people are coming. At that point, people are going to pick up their instruments of violence. You know, in the past, it was pitchforks. And, you know, metaphorically, it's always been pitchforks and torches. They're picking something up and they're going to the street, and they ain't coming back without an answer. And if they come back with an answer, the people who put them in that position will not be alive. And they'll burn those Paris, all of them. They'll burn them to the ground. They'll burn those cities to the ground. They'll turn cars over. They'll burn everything to the ground. They will. Some of these countries may fall, and when I mean fall into chaos and anarchy. I mean, why not? If you ain't got no gas, if you don't have food, I mean, think about this. Once you run out of electricity and things like that, how do you, at the food plants and stuff, how do you process food? Refrigeration. Meat. How long's your meat gonna last? Your meats and different things like that, frozen foods, things like that. Once your electricity starts running out on a large scale, you got real problems as a society, real existential problems as a society. So at that point, people start tearing shit apart. That is what Europe has to look forward to. That's the outcome that the US wants for Europe, is designed for Europe. They want the end of World War II again in Europe, which means Europe is a pile of garbage and they get to sweep it into the trash bin and start all over again. Now, clearly, they want Russia and China to do the same. The plan is we suck Russia into a war. I mean, it's right there in the Rand report from 2019. Anybody can read it. We draw Russia into a war, and then we sanction Russia out of existence. We sanction the EU out of existence. And then we have total power of the EU, and we take Russia, we split it up, we balkanize it, we take their resources, and then we're really, really powerful. Then we go after China. And then we either one of two things. Either we draw China into a war in Taiwan and do the same thing to them and sanction them out of existence, or we simply just start the sanctions. We just simply, now we have Europe, we have Russia, and which means we can re-exert our power. If we've got Europe and Russia, we can re-exert our power on the global south and everybody else. We got it. We now say to China, China, we're closing down all your markets. You can't sell to anybody unless we tell you to. So guess what? Now we take over China, all without firing a shot. And we've turned Russia into a pile of trash, and we're going to rebuild it because we took all of their stuff, and we got all of that oil, we got all those commodities that China needs. So we cut off China from the commodities and from the oil that it needs, and everything that it needs. We cut China off and we stop them. Because look, the only problem the US has with China is that its economy is growing, which means that makes it a foe. Its economy is growing. The government is, whether you like it, don't like it, I don't care. The bottom line is the government of China is looking out for China. They're making more money. They're getting more powerful. That's all they're doing, which any country would try to do. The U.S. has a problem with that. And of course, you got a bunch of jackasses in the United States who are brainwashed to believe somehow that they have a right to tell the people of China and the government of China what they should do inside of China. A bunch of imperialist-minded jackasses in the United States. And you'll see them online. Well, China's doing this. What the hell business of yours is with China? Your country's all fucked up, and you're trying to figure out, well, China shouldn't do this, and they shouldn't do that. None of your damn business what they do. Fix your country. Don't be sitting in your house talking about, well, you know, Garland's over there, and he's eating such and such. You shouldn't eat that. It's not sustainable. It's ruining the environment. Get that, mind your damn business. It's your house, and your house is falling apart. It's raining. Water's coming through the roof. People are running around like zombies, biting each other, screaming. Your kids are, you know, running around with poopy diapers on, and you're like, yeah, but over in Garland's house, they don't have, the carpets aren't clean enough. It's none of your damn business. But Americans are so brainwashed into being imperialist that Americans are like, yeah, we don't like what the Chinese are doing. Well, you don't have to like it. It ain't your damn business. That's my point. It ain't your business. You don't need to like what the Chinese are doing. You ain't Chinese. You need to mind your damn business and try to fix your own country. So at any rate, let me get back to it. So we've run through the plan, right? That's the plan. The plan is waste, trash, destroy Europe and its garbage. And of course, Russia and China too. And now you're the last man standing. I mean, how cynical and evil is that plan? You're trying to, China is trying to better the lives of their people. Russia's trying to better the lives of their people. I wish I could say that about Europe. I used to think it's true, but now we know it ain't. But go to the global south. Some of it, you know, Hungary, some of these countries actually are looking out for their people, right? Global south countries, you got to give them credit. The Middle East, Africa, South America, they got sense. They're like, no, what are you, out of your mind? We're not sanctioning Russia. We need wheat and shit from them. Their leaders are actually much more reasonable and sensible and practical than the leaders of the Europeans. They're like, hey, I'm sorry, we ain't going along with this. We got to eat, bro. We got to eat, man. And that comes in first. The Europeans are like, yeah, we got to eat, but we don't give a shit. We can, you know, we can lose 20% of the population to starvation. That's kind of the plan. And then we'll move forward. So that's cool. They ain't willing to do that in the global south. They have better leaders. They have better leaders in China, excuse me. And yeah, I'll say that. Better leaders in Asia, better leaders in the global south than they do in the EU. The EU has some of the worst leaders in the history of bad leaders, because I've never, think about it historically. When have you seen a time when the leaders of a country deliberately, with malice and aforethought, wiped out the economy of their own country just because some fruitcake of 4,000 miles away told them to do it? Historically, nobody'd ever do that until now. Now you've got some clowns that will actually do that. So let me say this about the World War III part of it. So you get my point about what the US wants economically. They ain't getting it. The only thing they'll get to do is wipe out Europe. And let me add one other thing, because I'll get a little bit more to the World War III part about it. In that, they've also done something else. They've revealed a reality about economics worldwide. They've revealed a reality that it's better to have things than it is to have um, thoughts, than to have concepts. Derivative is a derivative, and asset-backed securities are concepts. I mean, when you start really getting into what derivatives are, even the people that sell them don't know what they are. I could talk to you about what they kind of are, but is that real? By the time, when somebody gets to the point where it's derivatives, to read the paper, the documents, and figure out where this supposedly investment came from and how it works, even the people that created these things don't even understand. We got a bunch of loans. We're going to stick now we got $1 billion worth of loans. We're going to stick all these loans together, and then we're going to slice that up, and then we're going to sell that as though it were loans. So we're slicing up a pile of loans, and we're going to sell that as though that were loans, and that's going to be derivatives. What the hell? And then what we're going to do is we're going to take out insurance with an insurance company in case those loans fall apart, but we don't really know what they are, right? And we're going to call that insurance a credit default swap, because if these magical economic financial instruments fall apart, we don't want to have to suffer if that credit defaults. We're going to swap that with an insurance company by selling the liability. So if it falls apart, if this magical thing that we put together falls apart, AIG, the insurance company, will pay us anyway. So if it makes money, we win. We don't know what the hell it is, so God knows. But if it doesn't, then AIG is going to pay us. And that's what happened in 2008. They all fell, and AIG didn't have enough money to pay. But they knew they were going to fall because they were designed to fall, because they were garbage. That's what they're doing now, only on a much bigger scale. So what was revealed with these sanctions is that magical financial instruments are bullcrap. That what you want in reality are things. You want titanium, you want oil, you want gas, you want things that people need. You can't sanction things that people need, because people are always going to buy what they need, sanctions or not. You got a company and you need gas to run your company. You're going to buy gas, unless you're Europe, and then you're not going to buy gas, and then your ass is grass. No gas, your ass is grass. And the U.S. is going to be the lawnmower. That's weird. I just got some music playing. That's weird. Hold on. That's weird. My radio just started playing. I don't even know what the hell the music was. Excuse me. My phone just started playing music out of the blue for no reason. That's weird. I don't know. You know what it probably was, actually? You know how it's always listening, and you say something and it hears like, okay, Google, and then it hears like play something or other, and you don't know what it is. So it just started playing. Oh, okay. It's doing it again. Wow, that's weird. Okay, so let me continue. So here's the bottom line on all of that. What happened was, it was the truth about money was revealed. That when money started, it was, I'm going to trade you a bag of rice for a bag of sugar, and he's going to trade a bag of sugar for a bag of salted pork, and he's going to trade that salted pork for some salted fish, right? That's the way it started. And then it went to, okay, we'll use shells to represent the pork or fish or whatever, right? And then there's money, right? And then it's got to the point now where we're using magic, and we don't have fish or shells or anything. We got magic in a virtual reality. But people still need fish and salted pork and sugar. And what they forgot is that the magical money was based on fish and salted pork and rice and things of that nature. And Russia has things of that nature. So what has been re-revealed to these technocratic idiots who thought that their magical way of making money was taking over, and that was it, and they had control of the world's economic system with financial magic. What they found out is when times get tough, people still need fish and salted pork and rice and sugar and matches and the basic things to survive. And so when they went for it and they tried to take Russia out with magic, oh, we're going to take your this and we're going to take your money and this and that, and Russia, and everybody around the world called Russia and said, don't, hello, Russia. Yeah, I don't give a damn what those idiots in US say. Don't stop sending us that oil and titanium. Look at Japan. Japan's like, I can go along with the sanctions, except when it comes to gas, because we need that shit. And it drove the prices. The other part of it too, and this is important, the other thing that happened was every time you sanction them, it drives the price up. That's the other thing. What are you going to do? We're going to sanction nickel. The price of nickel goes up. Why? Because you've created artificial scarcity in the market, right? It's, hey, just the fact. See, keep in mind something. Part of the market is in the US, since it's magic is about what? Speculation, the speculators. So what happens as soon as you sanction somebody, you say, look, you need aluminum. Yeah, we're going to sanction aluminum. And the speculators say, holy shit, the price of aluminum is getting ready. It's going to be harder to get aluminum. And they start buy. Whoop, up goes the price. So paradoxically, every time you sanction something with Russia to hurt them, you drive the price up, which means they can sell much less and make much more. You know who's won here? Russia, economically. They don't want a war. They don't want all this stuff. But economically, Russia needs to sell less and make more. You've driven up the price of all of their commodities. So, and meanwhile, in deindustrializing Europe, look, I think, if I'm not mistaken, BMW sells 38% of their cars in China. Mercedes, like 40%. Can they afford to cut off from China? The U.S. wants to cut them off from China because the U.S. wants to sell those cars in China or whatever. But even if it doesn't sell those cars in China, the U.S. wants Europe to stop making money and shut the hell down so people won't buy Porsches and BMWs and shit like that. They'll buy Fords and Chevys. So the other big part was it revealed, they didn't intend to do this, but it revealed that when you go back, when you make things difficult in the financial markets, the market reverts back to its foundation, and its foundation is commodities, right? It's like people. When it comes down to it, where do we get our food? It comes from the ground. Whether it's you're eating a steer, a steak, where'd that steak come from? That steer was raised on grass or whatever the hell he was raised on. That stuff came out of the ground. You're eating corn. Where'd that come from? You're eating potatoes. Where'd that come from? Everything we get, all of our food is coming out of the ground, right? That's the foundation. When it comes to all this magic of all these things on Wall Street, somebody somewhere has to be making widgets. Somebody somewhere. You cannot have an oil speculators market without oil. That's why they can't touch Iran, because if Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz, the oil speculation will go to bloody hell, and the derivatives market worldwide will crash. So they got to be really wary about going at Iran, because Iran can really blow the global economy up quickly, instantly, by closing the Straits of Hormuz. So anyway, so let's move on. World War III. I got to talk about this. I've got to get to this. Maybe I should have started it. I mean, that's the name of the video. Sorry about that. But anyway, we're getting to it. I've only got a few more minutes. I would argue that World War III, we can put a time or date on it, but it started when the United States decided that it had to act against Russia, because it started going against China first. I mean, Russia before China. When the U.S. decided it had to act with malice towards Russia to stop Russia's rise, to not just, and keep in mind something, they want to stop Russia's rise, but they want worse than that. Russia's right. They want to break Russia up and steal its resources. That's what they want to do. So at the point 2007, 8, I would say, when the U.S. said, the U.S. NATO is the way the tool, the instrument the U.S. uses to claim power of attorney over the foreign policy of the EU. Right, the European Union is the tool that the U.S. uses to claim power of attorney over the EU's uh, domestic and economic policy, right? That's what it is. One's to claim power of attorney for their foreign policy. The other is used as a tool to claim power of attorney for their domestic and economic policy. But 2008-ish, somewhere around 7, 8, I don't remember exactly when it was. It was in April. It was in Budapest. And they had a NATO meeting. And that's when the U.S. says, we're going to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, and Russia said that'll mean war. That's a red line. You do that, we go to war, right? At that point, I think I would argue that was the beginning. That was the opening shot there, because the U.S. decided why? First of all, why? The fact of the matter is this. When Vladimir Putin came into power, he wanted to integrate with the West. He said, we're part of Europe. He said, we want to be part of NATO. Can we be part of NATO? Can we join? The problem is this. Vladimir Putin was not willing to give up independence and sovereignty. They were not willing to grant NATO / the U.S. power of attorney for their domestic and foreign policy. And the U.S. knew it. So they said for two things. They said, no, you can't join NATO. No, you can't be our friend. No, you can't be part of the group. Why? Two reasons. Number one, because you're too independent. Number two, because you are a foil. We make a lot of money. We say to the East, we say to the Europeans, the Russians are coming to get you. Therefore, you got to buy X amount of billions of dollars worth of shit. And I'm sorry, if you become our friend like you want to be, that won't work anymore. How are we going to sell all of this crap? So there's a number of reasons, but you can't be a part of the gang. We have to use you as the foil. And besides that, we want all of your shit. We want all of your stuff. Remember, there was a time when the Europe said to Russia, you need to allow the Europeans and the Americans to come over and develop your gas and oil fields. And the Russians like, you got to be freaking kidding me. That ain't happening. At that point, again, they exercised independence and sovereignty. The U.S. at that point said they got to go. And now, meanwhile, the U.S. looked at China and they said, oh my God, look at all of this cheap labor. Screw our people. Close down all the factories, move them over there and get the cheap labor. They did that and got the cheap labor, never suspecting that they were going to fuel the rise of an industrial power. But they did it. And then they woke up and said, holy crap, they're an industrial power. This is terrible. We got to try to stop them. So World War III began with the U.S. empire saying, we got to take out Russia and steal all of their stuff. And the continuance of it was they called it the pivot to Asia, a recognition that China was a growing world power, a recognition that Iran is a growing world power, to say they must be stopped. These sanctions against Iran have nothing to do with, they know, look, the CIA has said time and again, there is no evidence that Iran is trying to get a nuclear power. And if the U.S. empire was honest, they'd say that ain't what this is about anyway. This has nothing to do with nukes. We can't let Iran rise and be a regional power. We can't allow that. They could challenge us. They're independent. They're sovereign. They won't do what the hell we tell them to do. Therefore, they must be destroyed. So the U.S. has been on this world war to take out anybody. Look it up. Look up the Wolfowitz Doctrine from 2001. Paul Wolfowitz, psychotic bastard, to take out anybody who they felt could challenge them. And unfortunately for Europe, they're one of them. And so nuclear weapons have created a dynamic where it's just too dangerous to go into kinetic war. So the U.S. can't really just go into a kinetic war with Russia or China, because it could turn out, I don't care, the U.S. is like, well, we can have whatever we want to. Ultimately, number one, the U.S. is spread so thin, they probably couldn't beat either one of them straight up. They'd need a lot of help. Number two, and they're not prepared. First of all, if the U.S. goes to war with Russia or China, they're not prepared for the kind of damage they can take. I mean, Russia has hypersonic missiles. China apparently has them. The U.S. has no defense for them. So that Navy sounds good. The subs are pretty good. The problem they have is all of these big old Navy ships are sitting ducks. And when those hypersonic missiles start flying, they have no way to stop them. So you're going to start seeing everything get sunk. The U.S. that knows that they're not stupid. So can they do that? And then it goes nuclear, and then this thing's over. You lost. Everybody lost. So they're not stupid. They're evil, but they ain't stupid, these neocons. So the bottom line is that the way they see it, they got a plan. And the plan is hybrid warfare. The plan is war without war, non-kinetic war. We're going to use sanctions. We're going to use economic sanctions to take out Europe, to take out Russia, to take out China. And Europe's going to go along with it. And now it appears to me, and look, here's the bottom line. Putin saying it, Russia knows it. But from Russia's perspective, the rest of this stuff ain't as important to us. You're trying to take us out, right? I mean, you can be trying to take my neighbors out, do everything, but right now you're in my house and you want to burn my house down and kill everybody in it. I got to stop you from doing that first and foremost. But Russia already also knows something that the U.S. knows, that the world knows. The U.S. has been pushing countries around saying, do what we want or else. And Russia knows that they have said to the U.S., that ain't going happening. You're not going to do whatever you want with us, and you're not going to do whatever you want on our border. And the U.S. is saying, oh, yes, we are. You can't stop us, and we'll use all power at our means. And Russia now has said, we will see. They've called their bluff. Some guy says, Garland, I'll kick your ass. I'll kick your ass. I'll kick your ass. And I say, you know what? Let's dance. Bring it. Let's go. Now the person has to make a decision. Now, do they want to fight, or have they been bluffing all along? So now Russia's like this. So here's where we are. Russia goes into this Ukraine thing, tiptoeing. They were tiptoeing, and I understand it. They wanted to go in here, and they wanted not to do too much damage. They didn't want to go blow the country to hell. They wanted to go in there. They knew in reality that Ukraine's military was no match for them. And so they're going to go in there, and they're going to take their time, no rush. And they knew taking their time, they could defeat the Ukrainian army, which clearly they could. But the U.S. upped the ante. And the U.S. was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. So now apparently the U.S. in Kiev has like a headquarters where they're directing the entire military from Kiev. So the U.S. is directing it. The U.S. is giving them more and more weapons. And now, as the Russians said, the U.S. seems like it's poised to give them some long-range weapons. So what I think Russia has come to the conclusion that we can't play around with this thing anymore. It's too dangerous. So what I see happening with Russia is this. They're going to put enough firepower there to end it. I think Russia is saying we're going to, I'm sure they're picking it up, but I think, picking it up with attacks. But I think what Russia's saying now is we're going to get some serious firepower around Ukraine. And they're now going to start to see what we're capable of doing. Because a lot of people was like, Russia's a superpower. They sent 100,000 people in there and they're pussyfooting around because they know they can win. And so what happened was, and this was the dynamic. The Russians had some areas that they'd taken, but they were lightly defended because they didn't have, I mean, let's face it, the contact line for the two armies is 1,000 kilometers. What is that, 600-700 miles? That's a long ways. So some of the areas were lightly defended because they didn't have but so many troops. And the Ukrainians attacked everywhere. They found some areas that were lightly defended. The Russians had to retreat. The Ukrainians took some towns. And then they said, ha, 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 look at us. We're winning. We're winning. And they started saying, look at this world. We're beating Russia. We're going to win. Well, no, they didn't really. But they got some victories. And they started saying it's a win. And then what happened was the people at home in Russia started saying, we're pissed. How come you let these bastards do this? We're much more powerful there, and you're pussyfooting around letting them take some areas they shouldn't be taking. And I think the leadership of Russia answered with, yeah, you're right. We've been pussyfooting around with this too long. And now they're going to do partial mobilization. They're going to put 300,000-400,000 troops, and they're going to bring, people have been saying, where's the Russian Air Force? The Russian hasn't been using their Air Force. They've been very, very lightly. I think that you're going to start to see the Russian Air Force, that you're going to see when I suspect that a lot of the troops will be, like, for instance, Russia has their Western flank. They got a lot of places where they need troops. I suspect that the people that they bring up will be manning the other areas, but they're going to take their best troops and they're going to put them in Ukraine and they're going to cut the dogs loose. and they're going to bring in their biggest, baddest, meanest bombers, and they're going to go in and they're going to say, okay, this square area right here is where the Ukrainian troops are. There should be, when our bombers fly over that, after that, there shouldn't be nothing bigger than a quarter. And that's the kind of stuff you're going to see. You're going to see real war, from real horsepower from the Russians to end it. I put it like this: I don't think, I think their moves, once they get their feet set, are going to be an overwhelming, devastating firepower to end it. Now, meanwhile, keep an eye out, because I would suspect the Ukrainians, they've launched some offensive. They took unthinkable losses, but they had some success. I would suspect the Ukrainians know that too. So the Ukrainians, the U.S. military knows that too. So the U.S. military is saying, look, we got to get as many Ukrainians together. They don't give a shit how many they throw. Human waves. What are they? They're the Ukrainians. Their job is to die for the U.S. empire as far as these people are concerned. That's their job, to be torn apart by shards of hot metal. Go out there and do your job, Ukrainian soldier. Go out there and die. So I suspect that what they're going to do is go ahead and throw some human waves out, hoping to disrupt the Russians, hoping to get some victories, get some PR victories, hoping to disrupt the Russians before they can get everything together, hoping to disrupt the referenda going on in several locations. So I expect the U.S. military to pick up the attacks, to pick up the human wave attacks, things like that. That I expect that to pick up within the next few days to weeks, prior to the Russians really getting their feet set, because I think they know that when the Russians get their feet set, they're coming downhill. They're really coming downhill. And so at any rate, and that's that. And I think the Russians also see this as World War III, and they know every 100 years or so, for some reason, the West, whether it's Napoleon or Hitler, every 100 years or so, the West has to come to Russia to get their ass whipped and go home. And for some reason, this ain't going to be no different. They couldn't wait till the 2040s. They had to go 20 years early, and they're going to go, and they're putting their proxies in Russia. And Russia, this time, as I said, watch leading up to that, because the U.S. military is going to try to throw as many Ukrainians at them as they can, and get them wiped out. The other thing I think about this is that the problem is, in doing these human waves and losing so many Ukrainians, they're not going to have any reserves. By the time when the Russians get built up, I think they're going to be fast-moving, heavily armored divisions, right? And they're going to be on the move, and they're going to bomb and punch. They're going to bomb you. They're going to punch through your defenses, and they're going to attack in all directions, and they're going to bomb you some more, and they're going to punch through your defenses and swarm in there and surround you. And there ain't going to be no prisoners thing. They're just going to crush everything in there. You're going to see some monstrous battling, and it will be after the Ukrainians have launched these offensives and taken, lost a lot of their reserve power. So this is setting up to be an ugly situation at some point. But and I think the other thing I think is that and I'll kind of finish up here, when the Russians get their feet set and get going, anything, look, at that point, they're saying this is part of Russia. If you attack the Donbass area, you're attacking part of Russia. That means that if the U.S. has some base in Kiev, has some center in Kiev where these generals or whatever U.S. people, CIA is going to meet and direct it, and you're hitting Mother Russia, you're going to find an Iskander coming through your window. That I suspect that at some point, the EU and the NATO will say, we got to get our people out of here, because the Russians, I think, are going to make it clear that EU is not a safe zone anymore. That you guys have been coming in. I mean, every damn body. What's up with Kiev? Bojo's in Kiev. Liz Truss is in Kiev. This person's in Kiev. They're marching around Kiev like they're, when the Champs-Élysées. Get out of here with that. This is a war zone. But they're doing it. And the Russians have allowed that to happen. You can go to Kiev, all right, but ain't gonna be no. Well, first of all, here's the thing about it. I think the Russians are gonna, are going to wipe out their infrastructure. They're not going to have water. They're not going to have lights. They're not going to have gas. But if you're coming from Europe, you'll be right at home because you ain't going to have none either. It's not like you can go there to warm up. So I suspect the infrastructure, bridges, all that stuff, they ain't going to be playing. They're going to be, it's going to be ugly. I suspect the hits will be hard, and we will see. But the bottom line is, so that's my thought on the whole World War III thing, that it's ongoing, that it has taken a different form this time, and that what happens is interesting though. This is the question. This is the next 6, 7, 8 months. This is going to sound weird. It's a great time to be alive. Here's what I mean. If you had been alive during Europe when something was going on major, when there was a major change, or if you'd been around when the pyramids were being built and you could sit there and watch them or something like that. Let's say some aliens landed and you would see that. That's a cool thing. It's a great time to be alive to see that, right? Right now, to see the changes that are being made in that the economic shift, which is going from Europe and the US eastward into Eurasia. That's where they're going to be the economic center, the pole of the US of the world, right? Well, is moving away from the U.S. empire, is moving away from the traditional colonialist powers, right? It's a great time to be alive to see that. People are going to write books about this. People are going to write long books about Europe. Imagine that, a country that has spent centuries, a continent that has spent centuries building up its economic prowess. 12 months, all gone. 12 months, and they are back to knuckle dragging, wood gathering, hunter gatherer, hungry people. It's interesting time to be alive to see that, and to see what the social reaction, the political reaction to that is going. It's unbelievable to watch. So it's in a I don't know, weird kind of way. It's a good time to be alive. There ain't a bad time to be alive. Let's face it. If you're alive, that's probably a good thing, right? But it's a good time to see that and to be able to evaluate that and to have these discussions in real time. So look, I certainly appreciate everybody coming on. I'm just about out of here. Remember, at Garland Nixon on Twitter, Garland.Nixon on Instagram. Just plain old Garland Nixon on Facebook. I think I got 8 or 10 days in Facebook jail left. I'm always in Facebook jail. Because it's not what I do. It's just Facebook doesn't like, for obvious. If you listen to me, you can understand real quick why Facebook doesn't like what I'm saying. But at any rate, then you can see everything scrolling across. In case they throw me off of YouTube, go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. You can become a member or subscriber. Members free. You can see all of my stuff. Subscribers, $9.99 a month. The only thing you won't see is every Wednesday morning, I do a show from 9 to 10 a.m. with Scott Ritter. That is my premium show. I do one premium show a week. You have to be a member to see a premium show. Other than that, all the 99% of everything that I do, you show, but I got to do one premium show a week. And I've got an arrangement with Scott Ritter that I do that. So $9.99 a month is the cost. It'd be great to help out with the channel if you can do that. 10 measly bucks a month. And of course, you do get that one extra show, my premium show you can watch. And anybody else, there's a lot of great shows on Rockfin, and you can see everybody's premium stuff. It's not $9.99 per channel. You can see the premium on any channel. So I would advise that. Rockfin is a free speech platform. I highly recommend. There's lots of other free speech platforms out there. That's the one I've chosen. Additionally, buymeacoffee.com if you can afford it, / you can see it right there scrolling across, / Garland in, and for some reason they throw an H at the end. Of course, PayPal or garlandin@gmail.com, patreon.com if you can afford 3, 5, 7, 10, 100 a month, whatever you can afford on Patreon. I appreciate it. Buy me a coffee. I've got it set up for one time. You can do that. Some people don't like Patreon. So that's it. Cash App, $DC Radio Man. I'm tired. I'm getting ready to hit the sack. Yes, Twitter at Garland Nixon. But before I do that, I have got to check my super chats. I really appreciate everyone who helps out keeping the channel going, and I want to make sure. So let's go to Sparky. After taking all of Ukraine, if West Ukraine's a problem, should Russia sell it to Poland and Romania? So it's their cross to bear. They sold the U.S. Alaska. That's a good question. I suspect that Russia's plan for Ukraine has changed. I suspect that Well, here's the bottom line. The factor of Ukraine is going to be much affected by the economic disaster, catastrophe, calamity in the EU. So what happens if the EU is in such a economic disaster and calamity that they have to come to Russia for a bargain? At that point, that ain't going to be a pretty bargain. So if the EU has to go to Russia for a bargain, if the EU starts falling apart and you get new leaders in the EU, new people running it, and the new leaders say, look, we got to get back together because these people will kill us and eat us, then that could affect it, because now I can see, in my opinion, at some point, because Russia can continue to eat and have gas, right? Russia can survive. The truth is, the U.S. is screwed up as it is, can survive. Why? What do you need? You need three things. You need gas, some type of energy, right? Well, really, three things: some type of energy, you need food, and you need some kind of a military to be able to protect your borders and protect yourselves, right? The US has all of that. Russia has all of that. China has most all of that. They get their energy from Russia, so they're good there. They don't have to worry about energy, so they got all of that. The EU has like none, hardly. None of those things. So again, we get back to hard commodities. The EU, which is the entity that doesn't have any of that stuff, is the one that's going to suffer the most. That's the one that can't take care of themselves. So at some point, I think they're going to have to come begging to Russia, and there's going to be a price to pay, and it's going to be steep if Russia is even willing to do business. Thanks a lot, Josh Jean Singh. I appreciate that. Oh, we got Sparky again. And Sparky says, do super chats early in the show get overwritten? I noticed that you didn't see my early in the show super chats and the few shows prior to Scott Ritter, whom I missed live. Just letting you know. Sorry about that, Sparky. No, it's just that I can become a little bit of an idiot sometimes, and I scroll too fast, and every now and then I miss a super chat. That's why I'm trying. I missed it, so it wasn't the system. Tish M says, thank you, Garland. Thanks a lot, Tish M. Let me keep going. I'm going to go all the way to the beginning to make sure I don't miss Sparky's super chat, because Sparky's really, or anybody else's, Oh, we'll see. There you go. I almost missed one. Bad Dude Corn Pop says $10. Good old Corn Pop. Corn Pop is a tough guy, huh? All right. So I want to go down and make sure I didn't miss any super chats. And next we will go to, I see some people are checking out on me, and I don't blame you. I'm kind of checking out on myself here. I'm very tired. Had a long day. We already got tissue. Okay, I'm going down. You know what? I'm going to go to the bottom and start. Any new super chats? Oh, who's this? Sparky, good point. Poland and Romania might not be in position to buy. Exactly. Who's going to have the horsepower to do what they need to do? Okay, so next we're going to go over here, and Jim Garrett says, I'll say it again, we're playing checkers and Russia's playing 3D chess. Knuckle dragging apes running us. I don't even think they're doing that. I think they're drooling on them and throwing poop around. David Morgan, thanks for the information and your perspective on things. Thanks a lot, David Morgan, and I think that's it. I'll be back when Jimmy Dore live ends. Thanks a lot, Kiki. Yeah, I came on early today, mainly because I'm tired. I can't stay up late today. I'm beat. So at any rate, thanks a lot, you all. I certainly appreciate people being on. I appreciate everybody taking their time. Wow, like 800 people tonight. Appreciate that. Peace. And remember, anyway, you can see everything scrolling across. Anything that you can do to help keep the channel going is greatly appreciated. I'm out.